got somebody who's got deep roots in making change happen and was recognized by the Ford Foundation with one of their 75th anniversary Visionary Awards and recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. Jeremy, thank you for saying yes to our invitation.
Well, thank you, Margaret, for unearthing my childhood secrets. And it's good to know that I was running fax campaigns at age 13, which should tell you that I'm actually not as young as I look. Either that or very behind in technology, which is actually really the subject of the discussion today in many ways. This is a photograph of the person that I think may be the most cutting-edge digital activist in the world today. Now, this man does not look like a cutting-edge digital activist. He is an Indian Gandhian anti-corruption activist called Anna Hazare. And Hazare has led major national movements in India around social justice, around corruption, around the everyday injustices of a corrupt society. So Hazare has been experimenting with how you do movement building in India. And in 2011, he asked people to do something that might seem unusual to many of you in the room. He asked people to leave him a missed call. So for those of you who spent time in the Global South, you'll know that a big part of mobile phone culture in those countries is that people leave each other missed calls in order to send messages to each other without incurring phone charges. So if I'm late for this event, I'll leave you a missed call and hang up, and you'll know that I'm on the way. Or if we're dating and I miss you, I'll leave you a missed call. And there's this whole culture around it, and in some places it's called flashing and beeping and phishing. There's a vocabulary and a culture. So Hazare thinks, okay, if I'm trying to get people involved with my campaign, what if I ask them to leave me a missed call? Does anyone want to guess how many missed calls Anna Hazare got? Just randomly throw out some numbers. 2 million. Any other bold predictions here? The winner wins the raffle for an unspecified prize. All right. Well, this is clearly we're going to warm you guys up. He got 35 million missed calls. And so that's extraordinary to me. This is the largest sort of digital technology-mediated action that I'm aware of ever happening in the world. And he didn't just get those people to do that. He used those missed calls to get hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets in Delhi and other parts of India as part of this national anti-corruption movement. And so to me, this is a fascinating lesson. What we did at Purpose is we turned that into a tool called CrowdRing. And what CrowdRing does is it allows anyone, anywhere to start one of these missed calls campaigns. So if you're an activist in Kenya, we've done the boring negotiations with the telcos at the back end so that you can get a number to use for your missed calls campaign and organize people around the world. We've done it so when Hazare did it, he had the world's largest CSV file. Can you imagine this? 35 million, it's my nerd joke, 35 million of these mobile phone numbers. And he didn't have an ability to cut that list, to re-engage them, to begin to kind of build the community based on that contact information. So CrowdRing builds the back end. So to me, the message of this is that Hazare was tapping into what Henry Timms and I, the head of the 92nd Street Y, call new power. And new power is this new technology-driven but people-enabled form of mass participation. It's the power that comes when millions of people coordinate together and create ultimately something that's even stronger and more effective than traditional top-down old power. New power is emerging all around us, and I want to give you some examples of where I see new power, and then we're going to talk about how it's relevant to the work that you guys do. New power is Beppe Grillo. Beppe Grillo is a guy in Italy who was a blogger with no formal political apparatus, no money, who basically, through a digital strategy and a large digital following, came third in the national elections in Italy and actually prevented Silvio Berlusconi from winning another term in office. Good for him. New power is Airbnb. Airbnb is a model that in just 6 short years has radically disrupted the hotels industry. It's now the largest single supplier of accommodation in the world. And it does that not through building big buildings and renting that inventory out, but by having millions of people share their assets in a very efficient and much less environmentally impactful way, and giving millions of people economic agency as Airbnb hosts. New Power is Kickstarter, which, as you guys all know, is a crowdfunding venture that within 3 years of being created was raising more money for the arts than the National Endowment of the Arts, the key arts funding body in this country. Why? Because it fed the agency of millions of people who wanted to support these kinds of creative projects in a decentralized New Power way. New Power is Giving Tuesday, which is actually the brainchild of my collaborator on this work, Henry Timms. Giving Tuesday, I think, is a brilliant, ownerless meme, which just literally without any formal organization, really, just by creating a smart hashtag, a set of ideas and tools that could be owned and used by thousands of organizations, dramatically scaled up philanthropic giving on one day, and has been, I think, and is going to be an increasingly important way for people to have a national and global conversation about philanthropy. Again, that was just a meme, and it became something very impactful. New Power is Avaz.org, a group that I co-founded before starting Purpose, which now has 35 million members around the world. Funnily enough, the same number of people Hazare got in a couple of weeks. But 35 million people who are taking action around major global issues, and which is now able to raise tens of millions of dollars in tiny micro donations, matching the power of much larger and more established civil society organizations. So what's the difference between old power and new power? Well, here's just a few things that I think are important to call out. One is that old power works like a currency, while new power works like a current. What's distinctive about new power is that rather than it being a limited, exclusive commodity, it's actually something that can be made and constituted by many, not just held by a few. New power is all about upload. It's not about delivering directives to people. It's about providing context, providing direction. It's not about sort of a few people setting a kind of command-driven or leader-driven agenda. It's unleashing power through sharing and through the power of peer-to-peer collaboration. And finally, there's an inherent openness to new power that is quite different to the closed structures and systems of old power. Here, however, is what new power is not. Disappointingly, new power is not your Facebook page. You can be incredibly old power in your thinking. You can still be talking at people. You can still be engaged in download, not upload, with Facebook and with Twitter. In fact, many organizations haven't changed much. They've just acquired a digital beard to make them look more new power. I might also add that new power is not inherently positive. The crowd doesn't always produce better outcomes. And in the ideology that you see in Silicon Valley, which is associated with many of these new power models, you sometimes find a kind of ideological vacuousness that many of you guys would eschew. And in your work, you're being much more substantive about how to create social impact than some of these new players. So there's a long way to go for these new power actors. Nor is new power the inevitable victor. In fact, you see these fascinating tussles between old and new power. The tussle between the National Security Agency and Edward Snowden. The tussle between Airbnb and the hotels industry and regulators. And this is going to be an increasingly important mark of the coming years. What are these values? What's associated with new power? I think this is really interesting for you as you think about your own organizations. What aspects of these new values? And so if you ask young people what they believe and how they approach life, you'll see many of these things reflected. Young people see participation and collaboration as ends in themselves. They're not just instrumentalists. They're not just creating a little bit of consultation as part of a process. They actually see it as inherently valuable. They tend to have a more networked approach to governance and decision making. So they're less focused on formal representation, on perfect inclusion. They're not going to build any more United Nations, they're focused on much more informal, opt-in, decentralized forms of governance and decision-making, which again could be good or bad, depending on the problem that you're trying to solve. They have a do-it-yourself ethic. If you ask someone under 30, they'll actually tell you, it's really interesting, why would I buy stuff when I could make stuff? Why would I just watch television when I could make my own content? Why would I simply stand on the sidelines of politics when I could go out and start my own movement? I mean, this is really how a lot of people under 30 have thought and constitute the way they engage with the world, and it's very, very different. And there's this instinctive transparency. That transparency sometimes veers on the side of kind of, vain self-display, as we see a lot in social media, but that transparency is a really important dynamic to understand. So we created this little framework called the New Power Compass, which tries to map organizations according to whether they hold old power and new power values and what their actual models are. Do you have an old power model or a new power model? And I'd encourage you guys to think about where your organizations might fit on this framework. And what's interesting about it, by the way, is technology companies are not all new power. We regard Apple as an old power company in many ways. Its delivery mechanism is it produces these beautiful products that it tightly controls, that it drops down upon us, and it's highly secretive and untransparent. It has a very strong new power following, and through things like the App Store, it has created and has a participatory base, which is why it's close to the new power end of the curve on the model stage. But really, it's actually quite a conservative company. On the other hand, certain models like Bitcoin and Occupy Wall Street, these are very new power. They're radically decentralized. It doesn't make them effective. So, in terms of thinking about where your organization goes, the question is, how much do you want to absorb these new power values, and how and where do you want your model to evolve to actually take some of this upload power and the power of participation and really harness it in a new way? So that's why we created Purpose, which is basically an organization that tries to harness new power and tries to help old power adapt. And so if you're a business, I think the question is, how do you adapt to these new forces? Given that these new participatory models are going to disrupt the business models that you guys have, and they're going to disrupt how you do your philanthropy and your CSR. And I think that this is a framework that we use to find the right mission for a business in this new era. And to me, I think the key fork is there are different paths depending on whether the core economic engine of your business is in and of itself something that's mission-driven, or where the mission is something that is adjunctive to the core economic activity. So let's start with if purpose is already built into your brand. So if you've already got that DNA, then our recommendation at Purpose is basically to say, look, just organize people around that mission. Organize people around what you already do. So we partnered up with Airbnb and launched Peers, which is a movement for the sharing economy. And it's not just about the Airbnb hosts, but it's about anyone who's using one of these sharing economy services. It's about the people who are making a living by being Lyft or Uber drivers. It's about the Task Rabbits, and it's about the Airbnb hosts and everyone in between. These people are a new sector of the economy, and this is almost like a 21st century guild that brings those people together and organizes them. So Airbnb's philanthropic engagement is by supporting something like that, which is critical for the ecosystem of what it does, and which focuses on the social value that's being created by that segment. I also like the way our friends at Warby Parker have constructed a social mission. What's interesting about some of these more native new power values companies, and I would say that Warby has very strong new power values, although it's got quite an old power model, and it sells glasses to people. The thing that's interesting about Warby Parker is that its social mission of that one-for-one glasses thing is sort of baked into its value proposition, but it's not the first thing you see. They focus on a really compelling product, but then when you scratch deeper, you find substance there. And I think that's really smart. What happens if you're not inherently purposeful? If what you do economically is what you do, it's important, but it doesn't necessarily have a social mission. How do you guys, as people who are driving corporate philanthropy and CSR, engage with the world? Here are a few ideas. Firstly, think like a movement builder, not a philanthropist. And I think this is really important. You've got to think about the people that you serve not as beneficiaries, but as participants. Because increasingly that's what young people will expect and what everybody will expect. So this is something that we recently did with Michael Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies. He was trying to make an intervention around the issue of gun violence in this country. He could have made a very traditional intervention, funding gun violence prevention programs. But instead, he decided to build a movement. So together we built this brand that was launched just a couple of weeks ago, you may have seen it, called Everytown. And the idea of Everytown was it's something that was aspirational, that people could actually want to join. It wasn't one of those political organizations with a name like, America for Americans Tomorrow Yesterday. It's actually something that a suburban mum might want to join, right? Which is key to this segment. When we launched the organization, we didn't launch it with a sort of lecture about the importance of gun safety. We launched it with an interactive campaign in which people were invited to see a video that was very shocking, which was a scene unfolding of a gun that was left in a shoebox in a house that a young girl playing hide and seek stumbles on. And you're invited during this very, very gripping video to actually interact with the video, to stop the violence before it happens. And then you're taken to a page that drives you to action, to join the movement, and to get your friends involved. And so that mode is inherently participatory. Secondly, think about how you can invite the participants in your philanthropic and CSR programs into the story itself. This is something that we did with the ACLU, which I'm super proud of. It's called My Big Gay Illegal Wedding. So the ACLU, this is not an organization known for its, it's not known for its upload, right? It's an organization of lawyers. And apologies to any lawyers in the room, but, lawyers tend to be quite closed and pretty top down. But with this program, we're trying to kind of help the ACLU behave in a more participatory way. So we created a national contest which invited couples who lived in states where it was not yet legal to be married to stage iconic protest weddings across state borders. So people might take a hot air balloon or canoe across the Columbia River, things that would show the kind of strange injustice of these patchwork laws. It was an amazing program. We actually found over 400 couples who were in states that were where it was not legal, who were engaged to be married, who entered this contest. Over 200,000 votes, and it was an incredible way to actually tell the story of why in these states where marriage is not yet legal, why this is so important. And this is just an example of a video that we made that tells, quite briefly, the story of one of these couples. And then we'll talk about why I think that's an important way to do the kind of work that you do.
We were watching Devil Wears Prada. It was a part where Miranda Priestley finally realizes that she loves her assistant. So, I'm like, I'm gonna go for it. And I said, I love you.
My heart was beating so fast. I was so nervous. He made me feel the butterflies in my stomach. We kind of just knew that we were in love, so it was not hard to say it back because I knew I loved him. Whether it's Raphael giving me a haircut every 2 weeks, whether it's coming home from work and him having dinner set up for me, I think it's the little things that really mean a lot.
So our idea for a wedding, drive in a limo to the Arizona-California border, and we love dancing, so we want to do the Charleston and cross the state lines to finally say, we're here, we're gonna get married. My generation, my grandmother, my mother, they both got married. So for me, that's huge, having our love like theirs. And in our relationship, it's also giving him residency, because if we get married, I'll finally be able to give him legal residency like he deserves.
I was born in Mexico and was brought to the States when I was 3, so I've been undocumented since. And I think just being married will change our lives forever.
And love for me is him saying I love you every single day. No matter if I tell him I'm gonna pick up dog food. He says I love you before he hangs up. The smallest little things that make me just love him so much and want him just like pinch his cheeks and give him little kisses.
Hay que levantarnos al amor. Weddings.aclu.org.
She keeps me warm.
So I'm pleased to say that last night was actually the reception, and Humberto and Raphael got married a couple of weeks ago. It was fabulous. Raphael's going to be getting legal residency as a result, which is just a wonderful mark of progress in this country. So, that was very much out of the ACLU's comfort zone, as you can imagine, right? This is not the register. We had this fabulous discussion with them when we created the brand, where the lawyers were like, well, it's not illegal, it's not legal. And we said, well, we can't call it my big gay not legal wedding. And Anthony Romero, the president, happens to be rather a hard-charging fellow, and he just said, this is fine. So, this is the cultural change, but this kind of work can really change how organizations are perceived. So thirdly, two more lessons. If you're not quite there yet, I think the mistake that some companies will make is that they're not there yet, but they declare victory prematurely. And this is an example of what happens when you do that. So you may remember a couple of years back, Chevron ran these ads saying, "We agree." They were very feel-good ads about, oil companies should look after the planet. We agree. And to be honest, Chevron is a major funder of climate change denialism, and it doesn't really have all of its ducks lined up. And so when it did this, the political satirists, the Yes Men, created a website that looked just like the Chevron website that they'd spent tens of millions of dollars on paid media for, which allowed people to create their own versions of these ads. And people quite correctly, wrote things like, "Oil companies should respect democratic institutions, not run them. We agree." And so, the point about this is that I think it's really important when you're doing this kind of work to be humble and to not rush to do the marketing, but to actually think substantively about the programs. And a similar example, I think this is all very well intentioned, but McDonald's has been criticized for not paying a living wage to its workers. And so when you produce a budget that says, and this is before the Affordable Care Act, that says, you should budget $20 for health insurance. Well, that's not going to feel very authentic. On the other hand, I think the fourth lesson is the stakes must be high. So you've got a choice in the work that you do. You could spend all of your time just funding the opera, and it's important to fund the opera. The opera needs to be funded. But there are some moments where you can take a bit of a stand, where you can put yourself a little bit more out of your comfort zone, and you can really change your sector. And I think two recent examples that I think are really impressive, CVS's bold decision to stop selling tobacco. As an Australian who lives in New York, I always find it absolutely perplexing that at a place that's supposed to be about wellness, I could pick up a pack of cigs at the checkout. I always found that very strange. By leading the sector in this way, that's a really important thing that they've done. And I think there might be someone from CVS in the room, so well done. The same goes for Gap. There's a big debate in this country happening about a minimum wage. Whatever you think of that, Gap's unilateral decision to simply pay its workers more and then come out boldly in favor of increasing the minimum wage, that's really important work. And if you think about how you can have leverage as companies, those are great examples. And finally, I would say, just when you think about this work, have a long-term orientation. Don't think about it as like a flashy campaign that you can run for a few months. This is a long-term commitment. I think Dove's done this really well. Their commitment to girls' self-esteem and body image has been going on now for over a decade, and they've heavily invested in that work. This is something we did with them, which was creating this weekend where mothers and their children could self-organize around self-esteem. That's about getting the bottom up. That's about getting upload and harnessing it in a really important way, not just making ads. So I'll leave you with this. This is Bia. Bia is an 11-year-old girl in Rio. When I think about the work that we do, I think about building for Bia. Bia single-handedly, using a platform called Minha Rio, which we're involved in starting, single-handedly saved her school from bulldozing to make way for an Olympic changing room. This is happening all over Rio as schools are being evicted. She started a campaign on this platform, and she gathered her friends, she gathered the community, created this amazing initiative where you could basically, there was a live webcam fixed on the school and people left their mobile phone numbers so that if the bulldozers came for the school, everybody would get a text and rush to the school to form a human barrier to protect the school. Needless to say, when word got out about this campaign, the mayor of Rio said, you know what, maybe we won't close the school. And this is the future. When you think about the programs that you're building, think about how to feed the agency of someone like Bia. Because if you don't feed that agency, she's just going to go ahead and do it anyway. So thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure and honor to speak to you today.